Welcome to the Ignited Recovery podcast, a new way forward for anyone looking for answers but feeling left out. If you've been searching for empowerment, triumph, and purpose, you've found them right here. You won't hear the same solutions, and you're not going to have any excuses to fall back on, because Ignited Recovery allows heroes to rise and become their best selves. I'm Dr. Addict, and I can't wait to be your guide on this journey. Are you ready to become an ignited hero? Hello and welcome everybody to this episode of the Ignited Recovery podcast. I'm Addict Jaffe, and I've got a special treat for you here today. This is one of those interview portions that I do every once in a while with us, and I've got Stanton Peele for you today. Now, Stanton Peele is one of those people that is probably hard to over-inflate the amount of influence that he's had in the addiction field. I mean, I've been at this now for, 10 to 12 years. And as you'll hear, by the time I got started, Stanton had already written something like 7 books in this field. And maybe even more importantly for you to understand, the first book he wrote on addiction was called Love and Addiction in 1975, a full year before I was born. Now, here's the crazy thing, and here's why I want you all to be able to listen to him. Most of you have never heard of his name. And the reason I wanted to have Stanton on here as the next interview we had is I never claimed to invent this non-traditional way of looking at addiction that I've propagated, that I'm trying to push, and that I believe in so strongly. And Stanton is absolutely one of these people that, if you're going to become aware of the fact that there's another way of listening to and understanding addictions, you have to know that his concepts exist, because it gives you context literally of the last 40, 50 years worth of information that you're just not aware of. And if you don't have that as a background, it's a little bit like trying to understand, Middle East conflict without the last 1,000 years, or trying to understand nutrition without looking at, the food pyramid and all the old school ways of assessing what nutrition should look like, right? If you don't have context for anything, you start trying to understand it from this moment, the present. And while there's some value for that, you're going to see that Stanton's way of doing things has been a lead-in to all the work that I've been able to do. And I'm not going to waste too much of your time, because obviously part of the point of this version, the Friday episodes, is for them to be a little short. This is going to be longer than the usual ones because it's an interview. But I really want you to be able to dig into his work. And I want to remind you, if you or somebody you know is struggling with addiction, we've got my book, The Abstinence Myth, definitely not written in 1975, published just a couple of months ago now. And we have a free offer. I'll put a link in, but it's simple. If you go to www.theabstinenceMyth.com, you will get onto a page where we literally offer you the book for free. I bought 500 books. All you need to do is pay for shipping, and we will send you a book for free. For those of you who like audiobooks, an audiobook version is now available that you can add to that if you're into it. And you'll get that one immediately, so you don't even have to wait for anything to get shipped to you. And if you know that you're struggling, I just got a message today from somebody who read the book first and then signed up for the course, the Ignited Hero Program, which is at ignitedrecovery.com. That's IGNTD Recovery.com. And you can do a whole course with me where I walk you through about 2 months worth of addiction help. And now without further ado, I'm going to get right over to Stanton. Do me a favor, take some time, pay attention to the way Stanton talks about this work. I want you to understand just how long we've been fighting this war to expand the conversation and extend people's understanding of addiction, and also the breadth of solutions that they find. Stan is amazing. You got to listen to him. Can't wait to expose you to him. Bye. All right, everybody. Welcome to this episode of the Ignited Recovery Secrets podcast. I'm really, really happy to have Dr. Stanton Peele here with me today. Stanton, how long have we known each other in reality, like not just in the virtual world, since we've actually met?
I don't know. You came, we had dinner in New York a few years ago. Was that
5 years ago or something?
Yeah. We've had dinner in LA, so we're bi-coastal. You know, we have a bi-coastal relationship.
We're not bi-coastal for sure. And we had you, when we had alternatives, we had you over there to speak.
That's
and,
right.
You know, it's an honor for me because, you know, it's kind of insane to me. I just put an article up in Psychology Today. I know you write for Psychology Today as well. And I wrote about that research, the University of Pennsylvania research that showed that calling people addicts and alcoholics is stigmatizing and shaming. Surprise, surprise. And it's incredible to me the number of people who, when they hear something like that or read something like that, feel spoken to for the first time, feel like they're heard for the first time, when you've been doing this work for essentially as long as I've been alive. And
don't rub it in now, Adi.
No. The opposite. I mean, honestly, I feel like I'm the back of the arrow that's just helping to aim the work that you've been putting out for decades now. And I know last time we talked, you were in Ireland, so you've got a lot of really, even still, just really new, amazing things. So much of what I want to talk about. So why don't you give everybody like a 5 to 10 minute intro of who Dr. Stanton Peele is?
Well, I just want to address further the negative stigmatizing identity is a bad thing about calling yourself an addict. And it's unnecessary. Changing your life is one thing. You know, labeling yourself an addict as something that you have to recover from is a wholly other different thing. And why give yourself that identity? Why get up and say I'm an addict when you're a human being who's facing certain kinds of dilemmas? Of course, I know about your story. Sure. Sometimes you do better with them and sometimes worse, but you gradually, generally strengthen your ability to recover. Yeah. People mature. You know, I speak about you got a family, you know, you always had a family, but you've got your own family now, and you're just a different human being now. Yeah. So from the very start, I've always been impressed. I wrote Love and Addiction in 1975. I've been impressed by three things. One is that addiction is not what we think it is. It's not something that can be pinpointed in the brain. It's a way that people have of relating to the world. Mm. The second thing that I talk about is that the best way to overcome addiction is to improve and enhance your capacity to deal with life, yourself, your emotions, the world around you. And thirdly, that you're not an incapacitated. Telling people they're incapacitated. You don't tell a child who has trouble reading, you don't drum into them that they're a bad reader. You work within their skill limits and you enhance it, and then remarkably, you find some of those children become as fully good readers as others, or perhaps their skills are in a spatial area. And so it's a strength-based approach to life. Why drum in your worst abilities, and instead, why not build on what you've already got going for you and your best traits? And so I've written books about that, and you know, I've spoken with you and at your group out in California, and I also have another blog post you've written where I think we're coming together again, is use of internet media as a way of communicating with people, because it doesn't make sense to extricate somebody from their life. It's like throwing them in prison to send them to rehab and lock them off from everything else. What you want to do is enhance people's ongoing ability to deal with themselves and the worlds around them. I know that was your brand of therapy when you did a lot of hands-on work with people. And that's what I do now with the Life Process program, which is an online program with coaching where we work with people, obviously in their homes, wherever they have their computer. They're dealing with their ongoing lives, their ongoing issues. And we're coaching as a way of saying that we believe in them. We believe they have the capacity to change. They don't need to consider themselves some kind of emotional cripple, lifetime addict. I know, again, that's something obviously that you've lectured on. And that their ability to enhance their lives and to grow is infinite, like everybody's.
Yeah, I think that's so important. I mean, you mentioned both of us kind of coming together again. You know, it's amazing. I mean, I remember when I first met you, you had already built up what used to be your in-person program into an online program. Honestly, maybe 5 years before I had heard of anybody really doing anything like that. You know, I'd heard of people doing telemedicine like work, but this was different because by allowing people the freedom to access care when they needed it, you really did free them as the same thing as what we're trying to do with Ignited Recovery. You freed them from being tethered to when you're available, having to travel to where you are, and all these other things that we've sort of taken as a standard in care around addiction, right? I mean, it's hard to argue against the notion that the de facto standard still, to this moment, for addiction treatment is the residential rehab.
Right.
People have to exactly extricate themselves from their lives, tell everybody in their life that they are now going to seek treatment for this problem that they have, which means all the label, all the shaming, all the stigmatization, all the supposed understanding of everybody around them now, who have they become as a person. I write about that in my book. I know you've written and about that in yours. Once you become an addict, you take on this different personality. It's as if you are not the person you were before. And now everybody's identified who you are somehow. It's like you have to let go of every other element of your personality. And obviously in a lot of traditional treatment, you preface every single thing you want to say to others in a meeting with who you are and the fact that you're an addict. And it literally writes off your personality in any other way. And so by giving people freedom and working with them where they are, which should be the gold standard, right? You don't have to deal with your addiction issues in a retreat in the Catskills or Malibu. You have to deal with it at home.
And you're a person who knows that because you labored through that process. It wasn't an easy process. It wasn't a pretty process, but you did it on your own. From the very start, when I wrote Love and Addiction, I relied on case studies of people, regular people. And when you talk to regular people who've overcome sometimes, heavy duty addictions, especially before the recovery movement,
yeah,
you find that a lot of them never got around to saying, well, I was an alcoholic or I was an addict. I mean, I knew one guy in college, he's a prominent art curator. And I said, he kind of got drunk every night in college and all, and he sort of denied it. And then I knew a man who's a judge who was stoned every day. And he sort of denied it. And I started thinking, sometimes denial isn't as bad as you think. He's saying, I was never really an alcoholic. Now he has a family. He's prominent. Now a guy's a judge. And he's saying, well, I was never really a... Why convince them of something that they've already left behind?
Right.
And in a way, they're what we conceivably as clinicians might consider their myopia. Why get into that whole mess? In the life process program, we don't start out by saying, you're an addict, or confess you're an addict, or let's add up all of the things that show you're an addict. We say, tell us what exactly is troubling you, where is your life working and where isn't it working? And by the part about where we say, where is it working, is again, not the way they do it in treatment. They feel that ganging up on you and telling everything bad about you is the best way to get you to recover, which makes no sense. I have a new book coming out with Zach Rhodes called Outgrowing Addiction, which draws in developmental work. You don't tell a kid all the bad things about them when you're trying to encourage them to do better in school. Say, oh, for God's sake, you flunked up, blah, blah, blah. Who would ever do that? And again, I think of your own case. You always had a lot of initiative and a lot of energy. It was a little misdirected there for a time.
Right.
But those are skills. So, for example, in the life process program, we recruit, we review with them, what skills have you demonstrated, what successes have you had. And people are always talking to me when in therapy and otherwise. Nobody's ever asked me about my successes. They've always kind of gone over, well, how many times have you been in rehab? And, and how many times have you betrayed your spouse? Nobody's ever really talked about those building blocks in my life, those positive things I've done, the skills I have. And to this day, we also do an online kind of a group meeting.
Yep.
And I always ask people, sometimes by the time people come and talk to you in therapy, sometimes they're already down. Yeah. I say, well, let's just kind of review some of the good things about yourself. What gives you encouragement, for going forward, what people find positive about you, what skill sets you have. Let's just kind of focus on them a little. It does two things. It, gives you an appropriate sense of yourself, but those are resources you're going to build on. You're going to get better by expanding and building on the positive side of your life.
Sure. Yeah.
I look at you, and it's ironically, your skill set hasn't changed that much. You've redirected it to positive areas.
No, absolutely. So, actually, that brings up a really important question for me. I know, I remember this came up to me right now just because somebody left a comment on this article a while ago, but I wrote it years ago. I don't even know at this point, 8 years ago, about the concept that you have to have been an addict to help people in addiction. And it's something really common in the recovery movement, right? One of the first things people ask you a lot of times, well, are you an addict? Have you ever? And it's funny because in my case, when they say it to me, I actually have the retort that they're kind of looking for, but then they get
those credentials.
Right? What made you, back in 75, you didn't start writing the book in 75, you published it in 75. What made you have the insight and the awareness to go against? I know what it's like now, 40 years later. I can barely fathom this. It was like coming out of the closet in the 60s or 50s. What brought that on for you? Well,
I sometimes talk about how I became an addiction expert. I like to tantalize people a little bit. I never took any courses. I have a psychology PhD, but they weren't into addiction back in those days. I never worked at a rehab center until I started a rehab center.
Right.
I never had a drug or alcohol addiction, although I know a little bit about what addiction's like. I wrote a book called Love and Addiction. And what that's built on is my looking at people's lives, including to some degree my own life, and looking at how their behavior replicated addiction, even when back then in 75, heroin was the only thing that people called addictive. People would laugh at you if you said smoking was addictive. But I was already saying, well, don't people, get in relationships that are totally destructive and then they say they can't escape them? If if the other person breaks up with them, they do the worst possible things.
Yeah.
They kill themselves. Very few people kill themselves when they quit smoking or meth, but sure. Love addictions, in a way, I wrote a blog once called The 7 Hardest Addictions to Quit. Love is the worst. Nothing is, because it so forms your identity. And I was always drawn to the comparable experiences of people around me. And I only got involved with people who were called drug addicts after doing that. But they found it, getting back to our earlier discussion, very relieving for me to say, well, look, we all know what addiction's about. Everybody's had a moment in their lives or a period when they were doing something they knew was bad for them. They couldn't terminate it. They got more and more engulfed in it. And it possibly endangered their lives. You're not unique just because you've attached that to drugs or alcohol. So let's get that barrier out of the way. Yeah. I know what addiction's about. I write about addiction in other areas. And when I go to I work with a place called Above and Beyond, which is an inner city group in Chicago. It's funded by a billionaire called Brian Cressy, who said, well, let's go into a place where people really need help. They can't afford to go, not that the Betty Ford Center is so great, but they couldn't afford to go there anyhow. And whenever I talk to a group of clients, I always begin by saying, well, do you really think that relationships can be addictive? And everybody shouts out, yes. And they all have examples of it. And they all talk about how often it's integrally involved with their more famous addiction, drugs or alcohol.
Sure. Yeah, I think pretty much everybody listening can probably relate to at least one relationship in their life where they knew it was unhealthy, potentially even damaging, where other people told them that it was unhealthy and damaging, right? As you're mentioning, nothing too different than potentially problematic substance use. And I forever have wondered, I speak about this all the time, about when do we actually decide that this class of people is just different? They're different human beings. people who are in long-term recovery using traditional kind of AA and things of that nature tell me that they're very proud of their addict label, that they don't want to be normies and things of that nature. And what I try to explain to a lot of them is just the level of pretzeling, just the mind bending they had to do to get to that place.
Right.
After years and years of indoctrination. And just could they imagine what it would be like if that wasn't necessary? If you didn't have to call yourself a different human to get that help. And what I find, unfortunately, most of the time, I have some amazing friends who are in 12-step groups and are on board and will, talk to me easily, et cetera. But many of the people, at least the people who reach out with those comments and negative comments about anything that I talk about, really have become so, the personality of an addict has become so ingrained in them that now they have flipped over to the other side of the river. It's like they're standing on the other edge, yelling back at you, no, come here, walk through the fire and you'll feel better.
Do they ever try and tell you that you have to, do people ever say, well, you're going to relapse because you're not a self-identified recovery guy?
Well, people now do one of two things. Well, three things. There are some people who just accept the way I live, because for everybody listening who I haven't talked about this much up to now in these episodes, but I'm not sober. I drink socially. I've smoked weed a handful of times, but it makes me really paranoid, so I don't do it anymore. But yeah, people either just accept the way I am. They either tell me that I'm in relapse currently, which has been ongoing for about 11 years, or they tell me that I was never an addict. And to the latter group, I always say, that's nice of you to say. I actually don't mind you saying that nowadays, but where were you 15, 16 years ago when I was being directed to rehab? That option didn't exist. That wasn't a box you got to check. Maybe you're a temporary addict. Maybe you're not really an addict, but you need a little help right now. Those weren't discussed, and they're still not discussed 16 years later. It's as if you commit to the club or you walk away. I have
I'm doing this book, Outgrowing Addiction, and I have a funny case where a woman came to me. It's such a bizarre case. People might say, that has no relevance to me. She was a teenager. She was homeless. Her family was broken up. And she used to hang in the corner with a bunch of people drinking from a can of beer or whiskey, but she didn't like to drink. So she would pretend to drink and then not drink. And they took her in, they gave her a foster family, and they had her go to AA, and she was a member of AA for 20 years. By now, she was in her mid-30s, and she had a child. And she said, I belong to a parents group, and the women drink wine, but I haven't drunk for, 25 years, and I've been going to AA meetings. And, you might say, if you never liked to drink, how could you have ever been an alcoholic? But her whole identity, she married a guy from AA, and he was fairly open-minded. I'm going to say he weighed on her. But when your whole identity is built around that, here's a woman saying, can I drink wine with these other people? I've sort of never drunk in my life. I go to AA and tell people I'm an alcoholic all the time. And it's the epitome of saying, remove the substance entirely from the equation and look at the human being.
Yeah.
And of course, what was true of her is what's true of you. She's a different human being. You're a different guy now that you have 2 kids and a wife, and you're trying to, make a career and make everybody happy and pay for college someday down the road. You're just a different person than when you were crawling the streets of LA doing whatever you were doing. You're a different human being.
Right.
You're not addict Adi. You're Adi Jaffe, who was always sort of that guy. And now you've come to a fuller realization of yourself. You're mature. Other people in the life process, but when we get to ultimate stages where you have a purpose in life and you have responsibilities. And for you, you're just not going to sit down, look at a meth pipe and say, screw my kids. That's not going to happen. That's just not going to happen.
Right. No, exactly. And then, when I tell people that, oftentimes they resort back to the, you're just one day away or just one moment away or something along those lines. And I don't feel like I'm one moment away from anything other than continuously moving forward. So here's what I would love to hear. I know you're constantly working on new things to help people. You're constantly coming up with new ideas. What's in your world right now? You talked about the new book. Maybe you want to mention that. When is that coming out? What are some of the new things that you're putting out there to help?
Well, I'm giving a book in Upper Access. Supposed to come out in February. I'm working with Zach Rhodes, who's a guy who both works with children. He found his gift there, but he had a heroin period where, you'd say he was addicted. And we're combining those insights that labeling kids and labeling adults as addicts and kids as whatever are similar processes. And in both cases, you need to help people see the positives in themselves, avoid labeling themselves, get support around them for who they could be, rather than how they might be misbehaving right now, and to understand that that's a dynamic that he calls it the soggy potato chip theory. If you have a kid a soggy potato chip, a choice between a soggy potato chip and a crisp potato chip, he'll take the crisp one. But if there's no crisp one, he'll take the soggy one. And the soggy one is having an identity of misbehaving, of striking out at people, of doing whatever some kids do in school. But if you give them a chance to develop the skills to get the real rewards, they'll avoid that. Right. A second thing that, of course, I'm very involved in the life process program. And one thing we're doing with that, it so happens my tech partner is in Ireland. We're going to, in the fall, I'm going to a conference in the county in Ireland, I won't mention it, where we're presenting the life process program as their treatment facility. In some counties in Ireland, they have quite a large number of people they call it drinking hazardously. You're not going to get half of a county into rehab. It couldn't be done.
Right.
We need a way to reach out to people as they need it on a cost-effective basis. So we're now discussing making a life process program, which is developed originally from a rehab. We took those protocols and we put them into a framework where they could do it online as an actual treatment program.
That's awesome.
Two other things I just want to mention quickly. I mentioned to you I'm on the board of Above and Beyond, which is an inner city Chicago program, which I love doing, because a man named Brian Cressy said, it's people with the fewest resources have the most likelihood of getting into addiction problems and having the hardest time getting out of them. I mean, the advantages you had, you could go to college eventually, and, you had a lot of resources.
My parents paid my rent when I got out of jail, and I couldn't get a job, so I wouldn't have to go back to drug dealing.
Right. And, a lot of people don't have that deal.
Yeah.
And so he created a drop-in family recovery center where it's focused social service-wise simultaneously with a variety of treatment options, like helping them with emotional problems, helping them with employment, helping them get back into education. Housing is, of course, a major kind of thing. So, I love going there with that group. So in a lot of ways, I'm as involved as ever. I mean, I'm 72 right now. I still seem to be able to toddle around and take a plane and, go overseas. And it's just a hop and a step over to Ireland from, New York now.
Yep.
And the ideas that you and I both are spreading, which are so common sense. In a way, we're just saying, forget everything you've heard about a disease that can never be cured, that you're different than everything. Forget it. Pretend you never heard that recovery never existed. What would you do? What would your grandmother tell you to do? What would your parents tell you to do to get your life in order? They tell you, settle down, go back to school, get an education, form relationships, become a part of a community, rely on your underlying values, seek a purpose in life, have something that pushes you forward. Those things make the most sense. And do you see this? Do you think more and more people are kind of, when you talk that way, showing a little sign of recognition?
Yeah, I'm definitely seeing a movement. It's funny because I come from the neuroscience background.
We're not going to hold that against you, Adi. I'm not prejudiced against any group of people, but go on.
Thank you. I got to tell you, when I was at UCLA getting my PhD, the disease model was it. That was really the only thing that was pushed. I still have a lot of, I'll say, the knowledge and the tools and the awareness that I gathered in that space. But then I really try now to to parse out which part of it is reductionist and just talks about the systems through which this thing happens and which of it is explanatory. And I think there's a role for both, but
I'm glad you know the word reductionist now, Adi. I'm glad you picked that concept up. Good way to go. Okay.
Well, you
can't resolve, you can't. One thing I say, I go to a bunch of people and I say, how many people in the world are diagnosed for addiction or alcoholism by a brain scan? 0.
Right.
I mean, a guy can take cocaine. He could be doing anything. You can measure that in the brain. And then you say, is this guy or woman screwing up? Are they distressed at their own behavior?
Sure.
That's addiction.
Yep.
And once you take those things, extricate them from, well, you can take drugs, you can get brain scans. Those things are measured in people's feelings and in their lives. And that's why you work with people.
Yeah, and the thing is, statistics work in groups, and that's the thing a lot of people have a hard time understanding. Yes, you can tell differences in brain function between long-term cocaine addicts and people who've never touched cocaine. But you'd be much harder pressed to pick out of a crowd with a brain scan an individual who's used a lot of cocaine, because we don't have those patterns identified. We have them identified by groups. And as you know, we work with people. So, Joey and Melissa's brains might look very different, even though they use the same drug. And that in that differentiation lies the clear difference for me between the purely biological explanation of addiction and the purely psychological. And I don't
ever diagnose anybody by a brain scan, Adi?
No, not just that, but again, even like I'm saying, if you took one cocaine addict and one person who's never used cocaine, you would not be able to bet the bank on the fact that their brains look different, because the differences accumulate by patterns, and we don't treat patterns, right? We treat individuals. And so somehow you have to pull yourself out of the purely biological. Like, a car is not a car because it has gears that connect the wheels to the engine. That's not what makes a car. It's the whole of the thing. And so you can
I would put it that you can't tell a bad driver until you watch them on the road. You know what I mean? You got a car and they know how to switch the gears, and then you watch them drive. The more you work with people on the street, and the more you encounter people, just the more amazing you find everything you discover. Everything you sort of believe, here comes somebody down the pike that's totally different.
Exactly.
I got to ride the car with them. They're going in a different direction from me. So we're going to make a psychologist out of you. Yeah, don't worry.
I think I'm never going to go get that license after what the medical board.
Well, that's an ironic thing. Let's just talk about, we're not here to talk about drug policy. They actually had a policy where if you ever had a drug conviction, they prevented you from getting a federal loan to go to college, which is the opposite of above and beyond in the life process program.
Yeah.
Here's the idea. We want a guy to go to a woman or to go to college, then they develop skills, then they'll get a good job, and then they won't be taking drugs.
Sure.
So for you, they won't give you a psychology license because you were bad before.
Well, they would give it to me, but what happened was, the story. What happened was I went through a year and a half of a 5-year probationary period. And what I realized a year and a half into it was that I was allowing myself to be put back in that bad addict criminal space, because I had to make a phone call every 6 o'clock in the morning to find out if I was testing that day. I had to ask for permission to leave the county. It was insane. And I was 10 years past my conviction. I was on 5 years of probation and never failed a drug test.
Like they wanted to make you, it's almost like if you had been in prison for 20 years, stop using narcotics, and they say, okay, before we let you out, we're going to have to put you on methadone. You say, I haven't taken a narcotic in 20 years.
Yeah.
You had to become an addict again.
Sure.
It's
all these standards came up. Like in my interview with the medical board, they asked me if I have a sponsor, what meetings I go to. And I said, I don't go to meetings. I'm good. And they could not fathom it. They just couldn't process the notion. Literally somebody asked me, like, is my wife my sponsor? I explained, no, I don't go to meetings. I don't need meetings. I'm fine.
My wife's not an ex-addict.
Right.
You went through a training program for, let's not say hating, but rejecting recovery. You went through the graduate program where you're saying, well, look, I've turned my life around. Look, I got a job. I got a PhD, for God's sake. You can't get a PhD, snorting coke every night. You can't.
Yeah.
And I've done all that, and they're saying, okay, but we want to infantilize you back to when you were an addict. Call us every morning so we can tell you not to take a drug.
Yeah. So I did a year and a half, and then I just had to say enough. I don't want to live like this for another 3.5 years. And, you said I've always been scrappy, whether it was drug dealing or in junior high or anywhere. I mean, I kind of know how to survive. And so it sucks. I mean, I have to tell people, like, when they say that I'm a clinical psychologist, I have to correct them and say I'm not. I have a PhD in psychology, but it's just, there's these little hoops that I have to jump through, but I feel more honest in myself. And I feel like I'm walking the walk and talking the talk. So
what's the best thing about you? Because the Life Process program talks about values and purpose. And at some point you said, well, look, here are my values. Here I am, for better or for worse. I'm going to try and do an honest job. If I want to try and help you, I'm going to try and help you.
Right.
I'm a professional. And people are telling me, oh, no, you're not. No, you're not. You're still a baby. You're still addicted. You need us to tell you what to do. You need other people to generate it. And you refuse to accept that. It's like rejecting oppression. It's sort of like, Jaffe Lives Now. You know what I mean?
Well, I hope one of these days, I hope that I can help change that system, because I think, as you mentioned, when you try to get into helping profession and you see that part of what they're doing is judging and stigmatizing the people who are trying to get into the profession, it's absurd and ridiculous. I didn't have the soapbox to create change then. I needed to go do a lot more work before that would happen, but I hope one day to change it. And look, you're without a doubt one of the people who's been leading the charge. I mean, there's a handful of people like you, Alan Marlett, Andrew Tatarsky. There's only a handful of people who I feel like have been speaking this way for decades.
Now, don't repeat the fact that I've been doing it since before you were born, Ani. Leave that out.
Yeah, I'm not even going to say that ever again. But, I've got to thank you, because, again, it's weird to me. When I was at UCLA, these concepts were not at all, not spoken of ever. I started
graduate school, and these ideas are so far out, they won't even let you hear them.
No. They were not mentioned at all. And so I discovered harm reduction almost by chance, by starting to read things. Once I started writing online and started reading other people's material, I found yours. I found Dr. Kearns, obviously my ex-partner, Dr. Tatarsky. Alan Marlett was mindfulness-based relapse prevention was actually something, at least, that was mentioned, because he did an incredible job of somehow sticking in academia and still putting in these principles, which was really, really great.
Alan was unique. He died, by the way, I guess it was in 2013. So, we can make this a memorial to him. He had a lot of guts, and he was able to do it within an academic career. You're gonna,
and he trained some people, by the way,
UCLA one day, Adi. Just watch, keep hold on there.
Yeah, he was. He also trained some people. Katie Witkowitz, I don't know if you know her, but she's
right. I know Kim Fromm at the University of Texas, who's very prominent. He has a distinguished group of students. He's a very nurturing person.
Absolutely. So that's when I started becoming aware of this, and as soon as it hit and it spoke to my experience, it's like I had to run away from everything that I've been taught before, still understanding the neurosciences we mentioned, but not making that the holy grail of addiction and pretending like it can explain it.
I often begin lectures by saying, well, I like to get people on the edge of their seats. I feel people...
Oh, we know that.
You've seen that once or twice? I say, well, everything you know about addiction is wrong. So let me just start with that assumption. So if you want to think of something, think of it, and it's wrong. You know what I mean? Heroin isn't addictive. Some people become addicted to opioids. People are taking opioids constantly.
Yeah.
Not only a small group. So that's like an exercise I do is I say, how many people in this room have taken a painkiller? I love to do this. Yeah, everybody raises their hand. I say, oh, how many of you became addicted to a painkiller? Usually, depends where you are, nobody raises their hand.
Right.
And then I say, why didn't you become addicted? That's the most famous addictive thing. Why didn't you become addicted to it? And then they'll say, well, I had a job and a family and, it kind of disoriented me. And then I said, I really don't want to take this. And I didn't even finish the prescription. And I say, what's that process about? That's called a life process.
Right.
That's where we're going to go. So, I like to start out by smacking people upside the head and saying, forget everything you know. We're going in a different direction now.
I love it. And yes, you do. And I can't wait to have this out for people who haven't somehow heard of you yet. And we'll have links to everything in here. Obviously, you still run the Life Process online program. It sounds like you're doing some great work with disadvantaged populations and helping them pick up the pieces where a lot of other people won't. So honestly, I just, from the bottom of my heart, I just want to thank you for the work that you do, first of all. And thank you for joining us here. I'm sure there will be a lot of people who will swing your way and check out what you're doing, because it's important. It's
called the lifeprocessprogram.com. And Adi, I'm one of your biggest fans. At one point while you were fighting to get a license, we talked about like what you could do. So I'm rooting and watching you, expand to conquer the universe. And I know you have a ton of fans. You got a family, you got a lot of clients, but I'm just one of them.
Thank you so much, man. Thank you again for joining us. And everybody, we'll see you next week. Bye. Thank you for tuning in to the Ignited Heroes Recovery Podcast. I really hope you found the information here useful and that we'll see you back here next week. And look, I want to make sure that this podcast is the most useful it can be for you. So please let me know by emailing info@ignited.com if there are any specific topics or questions you'd like to have addressed. As usual, if you like this episode, I would love for you to leave us a 5-star review and rating. Thanks, and see you next week.